A cannonball shatters the legs of a proud young soldier, and it's precisely there, recovering in bed with none of the adventure novels he actually wanted to read, that one of the greatest saints in church history is born. This is Saint Ignatius of Loyola, celebrated by the Church on July 31st, born in 1491 in the castle of Loyola, in the Basque Country. Ignatius was chasing military glory when, on May 20, 1521, defending Pamplona against French troops, he was badly wounded in both legs. During his long recovery, with none of the chivalric romances he craved, he ended up reading a life of Christ and stories of the saints instead, and noticed something that would change his entire life. Fantasies of military glory left him feeling empty inside, while imagining himself imitating the saints produced a lasting peace. That simple observation became the seed of what he would later call the discernment of spirits. After laying down his sword before Our Lady at Montserrat, he spent months in prayer at Manresa, where he began writing the spiritual exercises. He studied at several European universities and gathered companions like Francis Xavier, who took vows together at Montmartre in 1534. Pope Paul III approved the Society of Jesus in 1540, and Ignatius was elected its first superior general, opening schools and sending missionaries across the world until his death in 1556. More than 1,000 years before Ignatius, in 5th-century Gaul, a wealthy Roman governor would make a radical turn. The Church also celebrates today Saint Germanus of Auxerre, born around 378 and who died in Ravenna on that same July 31, 448. Germanus received a literary and legal education, married, and held high imperial administrative office, until, after the death of the local bishop, he was chosen to succeed him, in 418. The change was radical. He gave away his wealth to churches and monasteries, adopted a severe ascetic life, and governed Auxerre at a time when Roman authority in the West was falling apart piece by piece. In 429, he traveled to Britain together with Saint Lupus of Troyes to confront a heresy spreading there, Pelagianism. Already elderly, he later traveled to Ravenna to plead for clemency on behalf of a persecuted region, and was received by Empress Galla Placidia herself before falling ill and dying there. Germanus founded monastic communities, cared for the poor, and repeatedly interceded against unjust taxes and reprisals. He's remembered today as the historical patron of Auxerre, and his life teaches that true Christian authority isn't found in the office we hold, but in how we use it to serve others. By the 19th century, a young Italian priest would set out on one of the most delicate missions the Church has ever attempted, earning the trust of an ancient Christian community, without ever trying to impose himself on it. This is Saint Justin de Jacobis, born in 1800 in Italy and who died on July 31, 1860, in the Alighedé Valley, in modern-day Eritrea. In 1839, he arrived in Ethiopia for an extremely delicate mission among ancient Orthodox Christian communities, in an environment marked by political rivalries and strong resistance to any foreign interference. And that's exactly where Justin did something rare for his era. He avoided presenting himself as a superior European. He learned the local languages, adopted local dress and customs, and sought genuinely respectful dialogue with monks and clergy. He trained catechists and, above all, a native Catholic clergy, understanding that the local church couldn't depend on foreign missionaries forever. Persecution, imprisonment, and expulsion followed his work for decades. Weakened by constant exile, Justin ended up dying by the side of a road, far from home. He's remembered as a model for priestly formation, and his life teaches a rare lesson: true respect for another culture isn't imposing your own, it's learning to serve from within it. On the other side of the world, in 19th-century Vietnam, a newly ordained priest would choose to turn himself in rather than let someone else suffer alone. The Church celebrates today Saint Peter Don Song Quy, born in 1826 in southern Vietnam and beheaded in Chau Doc on that same July 31, 1859. Ordained a priest in 1858, right as Emperor Tu Duc intensified his persecution of Christians, Peter's public ministry lasted only a few months. He worked with lay leader Emmanuel Lê Văn Phụng, whose house hosted secret celebrations and hid persecuted priests. In January 1859, soldiers surrounded that house. Peter had actually found a safe hiding place, but turned himself in so the homeowner wouldn't suffer alone, and when questioned, he flatly refused to deny that he was a priest. Imprisoned together with Emmanuel and dozens of other faithful, he endured about 7 months of interrogation and pressure to trample a cross, a gesture that would have denied his faith. He stayed firm until the end, and was beheaded for that faithfulness. Peter is remembered for his total dedication to a ministry he had only just received, and his life teaches that real courage, sometimes, is simply refusing to let someone else face alone what is also ours to carry. And it's exactly that courageous homeowner the Church celebrates next. Saint Emmanuel Lê Văn Phụng, a married layman and father of 9, killed alongside Father Peter on that same day, July 31, 1859. Emmanuel was born around 1796, in southern Vietnam, into an old Catholic family, and became the lay leader of his community. During a period when imperial decrees banned all Christian activity and forced priests to live in hiding, Emmanuel organized local catechesis, cared for the poor and sick, and opened his own home for celebrations and to shelter persecuted priests, fully aware of the risk he was taking. After someone reported him, troops surrounded his house and arrested him along with Father Peter and dozens of other faithful. Over roughly 7 months in prison, he flatly refused to reveal other hiding places or abandon his faith. And most remarkably, even while imprisoned, tradition records that he urged his own children to love their enemies, rather than seek revenge against whoever had denounced him. At the execution site, Peter was beheaded, and Emmanuel was strangled. Emmanuel is remembered as a model for fathers and catechists, and his life proves that forgiveness is possible even in the most unjust moment of one's own death. Nearly a century later, in communist Czechoslovakia, a nursing nun would risk everything to help persecuted priests escape prison. This is Blessed Zdenka Cecilia Skilingova, born in 1916 in Slovakia and who died in Trnava on July 31, 1955. Trained as a nurse, she worked in Bratislava, caring for the sick with skill and tenderness, when the communist regime seized power and began closing convents and arresting priests en masse. In 1952, Zdenka helped a hospitalized priest escape, and took part in preparing a second escape, this time for several priests at once, except the secret police were already watching the entire plan. Arrested in February that year, she endured real interrogation and torture, was charged with high treason, and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Transferred between prisons and subjected to hard labor, Zdenka developed cancer and tuberculosis behind bars. She was released only so she wouldn't die in custody, and survived just over 3 months afterward. The Church recognized that her death resulted directly from the abuse she suffered out of hatred for her faith. Zdenka is a special model for nurses and persecuted religious, and her life teaches that caring for others sometimes demands a kind of courage nobody notices until it's too late. In a very different way, another saint of this day was a wealthy, ambitious merchant, described by his own city as greedy and quick to anger. This is Blessed John Colombini, born around 1300 in Siena and who died on July 31, 1367. John grew rich trading textiles and held important public offices, but early sources describe him at this stage of life as ambitious and prone to fits of rage. Around 1355, however, reading the life of a penitent saint sparked a conversion that completely reorganized his own household. He began visiting hospitals, caring for the sick that everyone else despised, personally asking forgiveness from his enemies, and giving away his fortune, keeping only what was needed to support his own wife. Other men started imitating him, dressing poorly and traveling through Tuscan cities serving the sick and reconciling enemies. People began calling them the Jesuits. That radical lifestyle drew suspicion and even led to his temporary expulsion from Siena itself. In 1367, Pope Urban V finally recognized the group as an official lay congregation. Shortly after, John fell ill on the road home and died. He's remembered as the protector of the historical Jesuits, and his life proves that it's never too late to trade ambition for real generosity. In Elizabethan England, an Anglican clergyman would at first refuse to even listen to his own brother, who had already converted to Catholicism, until a serious illness forced him to reconsider everything he believed. The Church also celebrates today Blessed Everard Hansa, executed at Tyburn, London, on July 31, 1581. Everard studied at Cambridge and received a position as a Church of England clergyman. His brother William had already become a Catholic priest, but Everard initially resisted all his attempts to persuade him. It was a serious illness that led him to reconsider his deepest convictions. He resigned his position and traveled to the continent to secretly train as a Catholic priest, being ordained in March 1581 and returning to England almost immediately. His clandestine ministry lasted only a few months. While visiting imprisoned Catholics in disguise, he drew attention precisely because he was wearing foreign-made shoes, and was soon discovered. Convicted of treason, he was dragged to Tyburn and brutally executed. According to old accounts, his final cry at the scaffold was, "O happy day!" Everard is remembered among the English martyrs, and his life teaches that truth, once truly found, is worth more than any personal safety. In Nazi-occupied Poland, a simple farmer would decide to do what no priest could do anymore: teach children the catechism, hidden in barns and fields. This is Blessed Francis Striges, born in 1882 and killed in Kalisz on July 31, 1944. Francis grew up working a small family farm, married, and had 7 children, spending 9 full years caring for his first wife through illness until he had sold almost everything he owned to pay for her treatment. When the Nazi occupation closed the region's churches and deported priests to concentration camps, Francis realized an entire generation of children was growing up without any religious instruction at all. Starting in 1942, never intending to replace the priesthood, he began quietly organizing gatherings in homes, barns, and fields, walking or biking between several villages, and prepared nearly 300 children for their first communion. That activity, banned by the occupying forces, led to his summons in July 1944. Even warned to flee, he turned himself in, convinced he had committed no crime. 10 days of brutal beatings killed him in Gestapo custody. Francis is venerated as the patron of catechists, and his life proves that any ordinary person can carry an extraordinary mission. And we close today's July 31st journey by going back to 12th century Sweden, with the story of a widow unjustly accused of a crime she never committed. This is Saint Helen of Skövde, who died probably around 1160, remembered by the martyrology as a martyr. After her husband's death, tradition says Helen managed his wealth for the benefit of the poor, helped build churches, and even made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Her son-in-law, described as violent toward his own wife, was eventually killed by servants of the household, and his relatives blamed Helen for the crime, even though she had been completely absent at the time. They murdered her precisely as she was on her way to the dedication of a new church, an act of devotion turned into a scene of injustice and death. Later medieval sources add accounts of a spring that appeared at the site and healings recorded near her tomb, signs that explain the devotion that spread through the region, even though they can't be confirmed as independent historical fact. Helen is remembered today as the historical patron of Skövde, still present on the city's own coat of arms. And with that story, we close today's 10 saints. If any of these lives touched your heart, subscribe here to Saint of the Day, comment asking one of these saints to intercede for someone you love, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear this message today. Every share like that is truly a small act of evangelization. And remember, the full prayer to each of these saints is right here in the video description.